Hey everyone, my name is Cooper French, and I wanted to start an archery technical series for you guys on my channel. It's been a while since I've used this channel, but I have some ideas for you guys, and if you guys want to see anything in particular, just let me know. Reach out in the comments or message me on social media, whatever it is, and we'll see what we can do. So for now, what we're going to do today is we're going to do an outdoor arrow build. So I've got some Victory Archery VLRs, and this will be for like my redding arrow setup and stuff like that. We'll do some other arrow setup videos as well, so indoor 3D hunting, etc. But yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so the first step of the arrow building process, we're going to determine what the correct arrow length is and then get it cut with the mod saw. So with these VLRs, they're a 31-inch carbon to carbon from the factory, so they come out of the bag just like that. For me personally, I'm a 28.5-inch draw length, and from previous arrow setups, I usually run right around 27 inches carbon to carbon. So that's where I end up cutting most of my stuff just because I'm familiar with it. But for those who are trying to set up a brand new arrow setup, what I would recommend is get your arrow set up to where like you can put a knock on the back of the arrow or something, draw the bow back and have someone mark it at the end of the riser. That way you have some room to play. So from the end of the riser to the end of the rest, it gives you an inch or two to play with arrow length, whether it's like, okay, maybe I want to try it shorter or keep it that length, and then just go from there. Honestly, your groupings downrange will tell you what's going to work. So a term you'll commonly hear in pro shops is going to be whether they ask you to do a pro cut on your arrows. So what that means basically is instead of cutting the total length off of one side of the arrow to get your desired arrow length, they're actually going to divide that length in two and then cut that off of each side of the arrow. So for example, 31-inch arrow, I want to get to 27. I'm cutting 4 inches off the arrow. So I'm going to cut 2 and 2. So 2 inches off the back, 2 inches off the front. What they're trying to do with that is you're going to get the straightest part of the arrow, which is mostly the center. If you were super critical and wanted to analyze it deeper, you could get an arrow tester and check the straightness of your arrows from end to end and cut off what we consider the crooked parts of the arrow. So for me, with these arrows, they're a V1 series, so it's the elite series. Their highest straightness tolerance. They're within 1,000th of each other, the whole dozen. So I don't feel the need to be that critical with them, but sometimes if you have the extra time or you want to go through that, you can. For those of you wondering which saw I recommend to cut your arrows, this is the Mod Saw Pro. So with this arrow saw, it has a lot of built-in features. Overall, you have your adjustable arrow length, which is super easy to use. You have easily replaceable blades. There's an arrow squaring tool in here to where you can square it on the fly. And it also has an arrow spinner built into it. They have a few different variations of their mod saw as well, depending on price range and what kind of accessories and features that you would like. But their stuff so far has been working awesome. So if you want to go another level, they have the arrow spinner on the Mod Saw Pro, which is great just to double check, like, okay, if you see something super obvious and you have a crazy crooked arrow or something like that, it'll show it. But another step above that would be using this AAE arrow straightener. So with this guy here, you have a gauge and it measures, I think it's within like less than 0.5 tolerance. And what I would recommend is if you do use this, you can use it like a normal arrow spinner and set the gauge in the middle of the arrow and you can see the straightness tolerance from the center of the arrow, or you can get a pin gauge set. So this is a .166 pin gauge to fit these .166 inside diameter arrows, and you can just run it to where you take your arrow, run that pin gauge, it fits extremely tight in the end of the shaft, and you can check like inside diameter straightness tolerances. You can check the ends of your arrows, make sure they're good, and overall it's just another step just to make sure you have your arrow set up exactly how you want it. So now that we checked the straightness tolerance of everything and made sure our arrows were good to go, we're going to start putting our components in. So what I've got here is the AAE Max Melt. So this stuff is great, and it's a good adhesion to where you can remove any of your components if necessary. It's not a permanent adhesion like a super glue or an epoxy or anything of that such. So the Max Melt's nice because you just use a torch, heat it up, put your points in, pin bushings, all of that stuff. If you need to take them out, you can pull them back out as well. One thing to keep in mind, is when using it on carbon arrows, do not overheat the carbon. You want to heat up the max melt glue. You don't really want to heat up the components or the carbon because you might have a chance of cracking it and then you've got a bad arrow you can't use. So just make sure to pay attention to what you're doing. So one of the final steps before fletching your arrows, this is a cool thing to try out with some of your stuff, is we're going to do something that's called bare shaft grouping or indexing basically. So once you have all your arrows set up, you got your bow somewhat set up as well. You're going to grab all your bare shafts, so point, pin, nock, no fletchings, and you can shoot them from 20, 30, 40 yards. And the goal here is to not hit what we're trying to aim, but to get all the bare shafts to group in the same place. Once you have them all grouped in the same place, or at least how you get there, if you have some flyers out of there, you're going to rotate your nocks until everything groups into one group, and you'll index that, and that's where you're going to start fletching. All right, so now this was the first round shooting the whole dozen. You have to rule out, some of them might have been bad shots, some of them might have dropped low, whatever it is. If it's a fresh setup bow, sometimes it takes some time to get things dialed in how you want it, how the bow feels, aims, etc. So we kind of have a pattern going on here. It seems like the bulk of our group is going to be right here, just 6 o'clock beneath these pins that we were aiming at. And then we have a few flyers. So we're going to pull probably about half these arrows, rotate the nocks, probably an 1/8 or 1/4 turn, and then reshoot them and see what happens. All right, so after a few ends of shooting and some nock rotating and everything, we ended up closing up the group pretty well. If you really want to spend a lot of time doing this, you can keep rotating nocks and making sure you're breaking good shots. And if you're feeling good, you can rotate these nocks until you have the whole dozen just like completely touching. So this is something that I've been doing for a while with any full carbon outdoor arrow, just because the spinal line on the Victories, it's an awesome thing that they do, but it's based off of a machine, which it's a great starting point. But this is another way to do it with your own personal bow and your personal setup to kind of refine, okay, where am I going to end up with this setup? So now we can just pull these out, and then what we'll do is we'll just index the nock for where that top vein will go, and then we'll fletch arrows. All right, so this is one of the final steps for the arrow build. So after we did everything else, cutting, indexing, squaring, the whole 9 yards and everything, this is going to be the last step and the most tedious part of this, other than shooting bare shafts and indexing them. But we've got some stuff here. We're going to set these up. Typically for outdoor, like, you're not trying to steer a broadhead or anything on these arrows, so you can get away with a lot smaller vanes. And what the benefit is to shooting a lot smaller vanes is you're going to have a lower profile on the wind, and it's still going to be just enough to stabilize that arrow in flight. So these are the AE Max 2.0 vanes. If you look and see any shooters across the world shooting like World Archery tournaments or Field or Reading, this is probably one of the most dominant fletchings in the industry right now, and it's been around for quite a while. So we've got our Max vanes. Of course, we've got our AE Max Bond adhesive. And one thing that AE recommends with any of their Max style vanes is you have to have a primer pen. So the Max Weld primer pen, that way you prep the base of your vanes and everything before you glue them on, and it really makes sure it sticks to the arrow. So yeah, let's get started. So for setting up your fletching jig, my personal favorite jig is the Bitzenberger. It's just easy to use. It's been around for a million years. AE also made an inline change on it with their AE Bits knob. And what's cool about that is there's no play at all with this knob on here versus the original one where you have a little bit of wiggle room. So you might not get your vanes completely lined up correctly. What's cool about this jig too is you can get a ton of different fletching configurations. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 flat. It's pretty universal. So what I'm doing on these is I typically run a 3 fletch in the Max 2.0s. I'm going to try a 4 fletch just because why not? We'll see how it goes and see what it shoots like. But for setup, I usually run a straight clamp. So this is a straight clamp. They also make helical clamps as well. For me, it's just easier to change from setup to setup with a straight clamp because I'll run this with a slight 2 to 3 degree left offset. How to pick your left and right offset, that completely depends on what kind of strings you're shooting. If they're spun left or spun right, then I would try and follow suit there. If you're not sure, you can do a test down range, and I can make a separate video on that as well, which is shooting a bare shaft at close yards to see which way the arrow rotates at like 3 to 5 feet. So I've got this set up. I've got my vanes in here. Typically with vane positioning in the clamp, it's going to be dependent on what length vanes you're running, what size nock as well, but also one of the more important things is facial clearance. So I don't like the vanes riding up super hard on like my chin or the side of my mouth because I feel like I could potentially have impact on that arrow, or it's just uncomfortable. So I try to keep it just far enough forwards I don't get a whole lot of facial pressure out of it, and that's kind of where I fletch my stuff. So with the max vanes, you get that set up wherever you want. And then you take your primer pen, give it a good shake, make sure it's all primed. And then you're going to scrub the base of this vane. Then you take your max bond, get this guy all set up how you want. A lot of guys, they really change strategies with how they glue their vanes on. So for me, I put a ton of glue on the base and I use a paper towel to dab the excess glue off. It keeps a nice even coating of glue at the bottom. Some guys are like, well, that makes a mess. And it's like, well, it's because you're not dabbing on a paper towel. So that's one cool little trick I found from some shooters in the past. So yeah, I just coat this guy pretty good. Get the whole base of the vane. And then I give it a good solid dab on the paper towel. And then I line it up. And I just let it sit there for a couple seconds. This max bond does work relatively quick, so it's not like you have to sit there and hold it for 5-10 minutes, but I usually hold it for 10-15 seconds, something like that, just to be sure. And also, one thing I didn't mention earlier before is I rotated my nocks to where they're in line with my first vane. So I'm setting it up that way to where I know where I'm starting, and I'm going to put that index there so they're all indexed the same amount. And then once that guy is good, if you see any extra glue, just take like a Q-tip or something, take off some of that excess. And then when you're ready, pull that guy off, rotate to the next vane, and start your next one. So there we go. Let's get some arrows fletched up. So first arrow of very, very many. But we've got our 4-fletch on here, so hopefully I can see if I can get that in the video there. So just a little bit of left offset, nothing too crazy all in all. But yeah, a lot of times, guys, if you have adhesion issues with vanes and stuff, just make sure to really prep your arrows, and also use the correct materials and adhesives with the correct vanes, because a lot of times that does matter. So for example, these AAE vanes, I'm going to try and rip one off for the sake of showing you guys, and if I do, then yeah, I'll have to refletch it, but this is entertainment. So let's see. Yeah, that's not coming off. Nope. Okay. So yeah, it's literally flexing the arrow shaft before it even comes off of these arrows. So as long as you prep your max vanes correctly, they're going to stick and they're going to stay there forever unless you try to chop them off. So otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I know this was a very long and detailed arrow building process, but I also want to try and give you guys as much information as I possibly can, because over the years I've learned this from a lot of different people in the industry, and it's been super helpful for me, and I hope it's helpful for you. If there's anything, like I said before, that you guys would like to see, just let me know in the comments, and we'll see you guys soon.